The topic of our study today will be Rebekah saves Isaac from sinning. Genesis chapter 27. You know, most Bible commentaries will title this chapter Jacob the Deceiver, or something along the lines of throwing shade upon Rebekah and Jacob for coming up with such a devious plot to steal the birthright from Esau. But the problem with such a title like that is that I think it's misleading because God already pronounced that the birthright and the blessings belong to Jacob. I know many of you have probably read this story and wondered, why did Jacob and Rebekah do that? You might have learned that back in Sunday school or whatever. Wasn't that terrible of them to lie and cheat and steal? Okay, but like I said, God actually promised that the birthright and the blessings belonged to Jacob and not Esau. In fact, in Genesis chapter 25, verse 43, God told Rebekah that 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. The one shall be stronger than the other, that would be Jacob, and the elder shall serve the younger. So we know that Jacob and Esau were twins, but Esau came out of the womb first. So he was actually the elder. He was technically the firstborn. But God was reversing the roles here. Usually the blessings and the birthrights went to the firstborn. Here God tells Rebekah that the elder will serve the younger. This was before they were even born. So this was already determined. So when we get through this chapter, we're going to see that what Rebekah and Jacob do is actually a righteous thing, I believe, in my mind. And I'll explain why. But in Romans 9, verse 13, God also reveals, he says that Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. Okay? And he felt that way about these 2 boys before they were even born. And I have no doubt he knew Esau's character. He knew what, God's all-knowing, right? He knew what Esau was going to end up doing. He knew that Esau would be a carnal, unspiritual man that only cared about the things of the flesh and the things of the world. That's why, and Jacob was quite a bit different. He loved Jacob because he knew Jacob was going to be a godly man, a man who would teach his household his word, and focus on spiritual things rather than carnal things. So, how could Jacob steal something that rightfully belongs to him? That doesn't make sense to me. If God pronounced that this birthright and blessing belonged to Jacob, then to give this chapter a title like Rebekah and Rebekah and Jacob steal the birthright from Esau would be inaccurate, I'd say at the least. So I couldn't give this chapter a title like that. It is true that Rebekah and Jacob come up with a plot to trick Isaac so that they could get the birthright, prevent the birthright from going to Esau. But they were doing that to prevent a terrible mistake from happening. Because if this birthright was allowed to be passed on to Esau, Esau would have squandered it, he would have wasted it, and it would have been lost. It would have been lost. In fact, he already married 2 Hittite women, which were pagans that did not serve God. And who was he going to pass it on to? His children would have been pagans, and basically everything would have been lost had this birthright gone to Esau. So instead of looking upon Rebekah as some conniving, selfish woman that loved Jacob more than Esau and just wanted him to have it, I look at her as a very godly wife, a loving wife, who was willing to put her neck on the line to prevent Isaac from committing a terrible sin against God by going against his will and putting the birthright onto Esau instead of on Jacob. And, no doubt in my mind, Rebekah must have told Isaac that God came to her and told her that the birthright belonged to Jacob. But for whatever reason, he didn't go along with that. And I think we're going to find out why as we get reading. One of the reasons why. So, and then going through this, it's interesting. We're going to get into scriptures here in a second. Rebekah is quite the opposite of Eve. If you can remember Eve, she actually led her husband into sin. She seduced him to commit sin by partaking of the forbidden fruit with her. But Rebekah is actually, she's the opposite of Eve. She's actually trying to save her husband, and she's going to use a very unconventional method to do it. She's going to lie a little bit and trick him in order to save him from sinning against God. So if you want to look at if you want to look at the woman you want to be like, don't be like Eve, Lucy. Don't be like Eve, be like Rebekah. She's your hero, okay? All right, let's get into the word. Genesis chapter 27, verse 1, and it reads, "And it came to pass that when Isaac was old, his eyes were dim, so that he could not see. He called Esau his eldest son, and said unto him, My son. And he said unto him, Behold, here am I." Now, it's interesting here, Isaac's physical eyes were dim. But not only were his physical eyes dim at this point, you see this happen a lot in the Bible. God gives you little clues, little signs to look for to help you understand his word and what's going on. But his spiritual eyes were dim as well, because he could not see that Esau should not have had this birthright. It should have gone to Jacob. Even if God had never told him, he should have been able to look at these two boys, Esau and Jacob, and know that Esau was a waster, a carnal man, and that it would have been terrible to pass this on to him. But he was blinded because of something, and you'll see in a second. Verse 2, "And he said, Behold, now I am old, and I know not the day of my death. Now therefore take, I pray thee, thy weapons, thy quiver and thy bow, and go out to the field and take me some venison." Now, of course, venison is deer meat. He wants his dad now, he's on his deathbed, and now he wants to have one last savory meal, as we're going to find out here. Verse 4, "And make me savory meat, such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die." So we see here, unfortunately, Esau's carnality is rubbing off on his father. No doubt Esau had been buying his father's Isaac's affection all these years by going out and hunting for him, providing him his most favorite meal. Now, like I said, Isaac wants just one more tasty delight before he dies. That should give you a clue. He's letting his physical desires overrule his spiritual senses, if you would. Because he's only this is the reason why he likes Esau more than Jacob. Because Esau is always coming back and giving him good, tasty meat to eat. Okay? And that's a lesson for us. We should never let our fleshly desires influence our decision making when it comes to spiritual matters, because it'll cloud our judgment every time. All right. Verse 5. "And Rebekah heard when Isaac spake to Esau his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt for venison and to bring it." Now notice, Rebekah heard. She overheard this conversation, and obviously she knows this is not a good thing. Verse 6, "And Rebekah spake unto Jacob her son, saying, Behold, I heard thy father speak unto Esau thy brother, saying, Bring me venison, and make me savory meat, that I may eat, and bless thee before the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice according to that which I command thee." Now, this one thing that people always try to say, that this was Jacob's idea. Jacob was a conniving man, deceptive, lying, cheating, just wanted the birthright. No, his mom actually commands him, orders him to do what she is telling him to do. Now, not only that, but it was God's will as well that it was against God's will as well that Esau would receive this birthright, or this blessing. The birthright was already sold, but this is the blessing. So Rebekah is in emergency mode. She has to figure out a way to stop this from happening. The birthright and the blessing really belong to Jacob, and now she has to hastily come up with a plan to make sure that Jacob is the one that gets it, not Esau. And many people think it was wrong of her and Jacob to do this, and that they should have trusted God, and that even if Esau would have got the blessing, they say, well, God would have figured out another way to make sure that Jacob got the blessing. And that's a good argument. That's true. God could do that. And that sounds like a righteous thing to do. But God doesn't always work in traditional, conventional methods like we think he does. One point I'll bring up, if we say that this is wrong, that Jacob and Rebekah are going to deceive Isaac. Let's take, for instance, the case of warfare. Is it wrong to use deception in warfare? The art of deception is actually a major factor in military campaigns. It actually almost all armies are successful because they employ the use of deception. We have the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, that wages all kinds of wars of deception overseas. Of course, now we got some of them trying to wage war on our own country, which is bad, but that's another topic for another time. So, in other words, if you are outnumbered by your enemy, or you have no other option of being able to wage a successful campaign, deception sometimes is employed in the hopes of victory. Okay? Now there's a caveat to that. You can't deceive people for your own lustful purposes or to hurt other people. Okay? That would be bad. But deception used in the right way, like Jacob and Rebekah are going to use, is, I believe, is supported biblically and can be justified. Take, for instance, Gideon and his 300 men. Gideon came up with a strategy to make the enemy believe that his 300 men were actually 3 large companies of soldiers surrounding the enemy armies on every side. He did this by dividing his 300 men into three companies, and he handed each one of them a trumpet. You can find this in Judges chapter 7, verse 16. So that it would appear that, normally you're not going to have 300 guys just spread out really thin and surround an army of thousands of people. That would be a suicide mission. So this act of deception actually worked pretty well, and you can find that again in Judges chapter 7. But in the middle of the night even, Gideon and his 300 men, they blew the trumpets, they shouted, they waved these torches, and they made as much commotion as possible as they could to give the enemy the perception that they were surrounded by thousands of men. And the result of this deceptive plan is that it frightened the enemy. They got up in the middle of the night, were confused by all this noise, panicked, and actually started killing each other. Instead of fighting the Israelites, it was dark out, they were confused, and they started killing each other, and then they took out the rest of them that survived the panic and commotion, ran, and then the Israelites chased them. But my question is, was this unrighteous of Gideon? Should Gideon have waited until daybreak, walked out to meet the leader of the enemy armies and said, hey, I got 300 men over here, we want to do battle with you, so let's... whenever you're ready, just meet me out at the field, and then we'll have a fair battle. No, you don't do that. That would be unwise. Warfare. When we think of warfare, and we are in a war today, a spiritual war, we don't always. It isn't like it's a boxing match, a friendly boxing match, or a sporting competition with referees deciding, okay, you're playing unfair, you get a penalty. No, warfare, the object of warfare is to defeat your enemy. And you use basically whatever tactics that you can to defeat them. Then there was Ehud, who deceitfully acquired a private meeting with the king of Moab by promising to give him a present. Instead stuck a knife into the fat man's belly and fled. I don't know if you guys remember that, the big fat king of Moab. Ehud actually was the left-hand man. He stuck that dagger and it actually went all the way in his belly and enclosed the pond. It was so fat that it was stuck in there. He couldn't pull it out, and he ended up dying. And you can find that in Judges chapter 3, verses 15 through 22. That gave Israel a great victory. So as you can see here, I'm making a case that if in warfare unconventional methods are okay to use, I'm not going to fault Jacob and Rebekah for what they had to do to save their family from tragedy. There was another example. There was Jael, the wife of Heber. This is she's in the book of Judges as well, who convinced the enemy king that she would take care of him. And basically, so this enemy king is coming back from the battlefield, and she I don't know if she had her tent there, and she welcomes him into the tent. I think she gives him some food and actually tucks him in, puts the covers over him nice, and makes him feel safe and secure. And he says, make sure that you watch the door if anybody comes here and says that I'm here. Tell them nobody's here, because he wanted to be protected. And she's just like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. You just don't worry. Get your rest, and then you can be on your way. So as he fell asleep, she took a tent peg and rammed it right through his forehead and killed him dead. So that's your biblical heroes there. Not the biblical heroes of the peace-loving pacifists that our churches try to portray biblical heroes as today. All right. The other argument could be, was Rebekah violating the trust of her husband? I mean, she was deceiving him and lying to him. Isn't she supposed to be obedient to her husband? Yes, that's true. That's there are many scriptures that talk about the husband is the head of the wife, right? And the husband, that's basically your chain of command, right? But if her husband is if her husband is trying to do something, I'll put it this way. If her husband is going to tell her to do something that disobeys God, should she listen to her husband or should she listen to God?
Listen to God.
Right, listen to God. Now, if the government, we're supposed to be obedient to the government, right? We're supposed to submit to the laws of the land. But if the government passes a law that tells us to violate the laws of God or to do something to make God unhappy, are we supposed to obey the government or are we supposed to obey God?
God.
Right. So Rebekah's plan here isn't unrighteous or devious in any way. Since it appears Isaac already made up his mind. She probably told him, no, you can't do this, and he didn't listen. So she was desperately coming up with a plan to save both Isaac and her family from a tragedy such as passing on the birthright to the wrong son. All right. Let's move on. Verse 27, verse 9. Or chapter 27, verse 9. Go now to the flock and fetch me from thence 2 kids of goats, and I will make them savory meat for thy father, such as he loveth. Okay? So his father loved venison, but she's coming up with a plan that Jacob will just grab some goats here, and she'll season it just the way, as close as she can, to make him think that it's the venison, right? That Esau always brought him. Verse 10, and thou shalt bring it to thy father that he may eat, and that he may bless thee before his death. And Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. So evidently Esau here was very hairy, had hairy arms, probably hairier than mine. He probably must have been a pretty hairy guy. So he's thinking, how are we going to pull this off? Verse 12. My father peradventure will feel me, and I shall seem to him as a deceiver, and I shall bring a curse upon me and not a blessing. So Jacob is saying, hey, I'm not sure about this. I'm afraid I'm going to get caught, and then dad's going to think I'm a deceiver. Now, this is interesting. Because the word, I think the King James translators did a good job translating this passage here by using the word seem. Now Isaac, technically in the sense, he wasn't a deceiver in the sense that he was using deception to go against the will of God. Okay? He was, that wasn't the case. So it would seem as he was a deceiver even though he is not a deceiver in the traditional sense. But somebody might quote the book of Revelation where it says that all liars, he that loveth and maketh a lie shall not be in the kingdom of God. To something of that effect. I think it's Revelation 20, 21, or 22. It's in some passages in one of those chapters. But that's different. I don't think, Jacob is not, this act of deception, if that's what you want to call it, is not for devilish purposes. It's to try to save the family and to uphold the will of God. Okay. Let me see here. Where are we at? All right, verse 13. And his mother said unto him, Upon me be thy curse, my son. Only obey my voice and go fetch me them. So now his mother is saying, hey, Jacob, don't worry about it. If we get caught doing this, I will take the blame for this. It will be my fault. I will tell your dad that I commanded you to do this, and so forth. This isn't a... Well, think about this. The law actually requires that children obey their mother and their father, right? So Jacob really has no choice at this time. He's been given a command by his mother to do this. So you could justify his actions that way. And I believe, no doubt, later on, Isaac, even though it's not written, would probably be very thankful for Rebekah doing this. I know I would. If my wife saved me from doing something really bad and I was just totally blinded by some carnal thing and I was just going to go and do it my way because that's the way I saw it, I would be happy that my wife had the courage to step up and not be cowardly and figure out a way to save me from making that mistake. Rather than, like many people do, is they condemn Rebekah here and say she was lying to her husband. It was terrible for her to do this. They should have just let God work this out another way. But like I said, God many times uses unconventional methods to get his will to come to pass. You could think of there's guys like Samson, very unconventional character that God used to defeat the enemies of Israel. Verse 14, and he went and fetched and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory meat such as his father loved. There it is. His father just loved this meat so much, it was just, his belly just clouded his spiritual mind. Verse 15, and Rebekah took goodly raiment of her eldest son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them upon Jacob, her younger son. All right, fancy clothes for a special occasion to receive the official formal blessing of the father. Verse 16, and she put the skins of kids on the goats upon his hands and upon the smooth of his neck, okay? She's putting hair from animal skins on him to make him, Esau must have been a hairy dude if this is going to work. Animal skin's pretty hairy, so if this is going to trick his dad, man, he must have been a beast of a guy. Anyway, 17. And she gave the savory meat and bread, which she had prepared, into the hand of her son Jacob. And he came unto his father and said, My father. And he said, Here am I. Who art thou, my son? And Jacob said unto his father, I am Esau, thy firstborn. I have done according as thou badest me. Arise, I pray thee, sit and eat of my venison, that my soul may bless, or that thy soul may bless me. So Jacob flat out tells an untruth here. I am Esau. Okay, and like I said before, are there biblical times when where it's okay to not tell the truth or to lie like this? Well, let me ask you this question. If somebody broke into your house and said, let's say you're a mom or a dad, and they wanted to kill your kids, and they said, where are your kids? And you told them that they were over at your uncle's house 5 hours away in an attempt to save them. Would that be unrighteous to tell a lie in that situation? Right? Sometimes as Christians, we get this holy Joe attitude where we're going to be dignified, we're going to play by the rules at all times, now I'm not promoting us to go out and deceive people and be a bunch of liars and crooks. That's not what I'm saying. But sometimes there's a time for doing this. In fact, if a parent was to say, I cannot tell a lie, God will find out a way to protect them maybe anyways. I got to tell this guy that wants to kill my kids that they're downstairs in the basement. What would be right? Which would be righteous? To tell the lie or to tell the truth in that instance? It would be righteous to lie to the murderer, right? To lie to the person who is going to do harm. Now, that isn't quite this doesn't really totally parallel over to Isaac here, but Isaac was doing something that was not right. And Rebekah probably already exhausted every other avenue to make sure that things were done right, and Isaac just would not listen. So she came up with a plan here. All right. Now, since I'm here, I'm going to talk about it. I think I got a little bit of time to talk here. You know, when we think about always playing by the rules and trying to take the high road and not stoop down to other people's level and stuff like that, when we look at politics in America today, the leftists, which really are like the modern day Canaanites of old, everything they promote is against the Bible and against God. They don't play by the rules. They don't have any intention of playing by the rules. They use the fake news media, the mainstream media, to promote their lies and to promote their false agendas. And then when somebody like Donald Trump comes along and kind of plays their game back at them, they don't know what to do, because he's willing to use unconventional methods back against them. And I think as Christians, we have to be able to recognize that there is a time to strike back against the enemy using unconventional methods, okay? Sometimes using their own tactics against them. A great example of that, read the story of Samson. If you think that God never uses that kind of stuff. In fact, Samson, it was written about him as having the Spirit of God come upon him more than any other person in the Bible. Yet Samson had been an adulterer, a fornicator, a brawler, a very vindictive man. But yet God's Spirit came upon that man to make sure his will came to pass, more so than any other person in the Bible. Just go and read those passages. You'll read over and over. And the Spirit of God came upon Samson, and he slew 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass, or something like that. Or the Spirit of God came upon him, and he knocked down the pillars of the castle of the Philistines, and so forth. So, what was my point is, when you're in a war, your enemy doesn't play by the rules. The enemies of our heritage and our culture, they're not playing by the rules. They're lying to us. They're deceiving us, and we finally have somebody willing to use some unconventional methods to fight back, and I think it's great. And I think it's great that Isaac and Rebekah, I don't know how many times I said that, Jacob and Rebekah did this to Isaac to save the what? The birthright. You think about America, you think, why is he talking about leftists in this study? What does that have to do with what's going on here? It's about the birthright. What is America's birthright? One nation under God. What was the big deal of preventing Esau from having the birthright? He would have destroyed that birthright of being a great nation, one nation under God. What happens if we leave power in the hands of leftists and we don't figure out ways to defeat them? We're letting the birthright be in the hands of Esau. The leftists will waste our heritage. They will destroy our culture. They care nothing about the birthright. In fact, they actually want to tear down and erase everything about our Christian heritage and history, removing monuments of some of our ancient war heroes and stuff like that, some of our great founding fathers, you name it. So there's definitely a correlation here. The birthright was to be a great nation. This birthright that he was holding had to do with a great nation that was to come. I will say this: Esau. We talked about it earlier. Many people look at Esau, this guy that was known for being red and hairy. They saw the Soviet Union as being a type of Esau. They were a godless, secularist nation that was cursed by God and could care nothing about God. And then you have America, which was like Jacob, who did care about God. So you can see these stories aren't just old stories. They actually apply to what's happening today. You can look at Esau as Russia, the communist Soviet Union, and Jacob as America, the nation who's trust is in God. Yeah, verse 20. And Isaac said unto his son, how is it that thou hast found it so quickly, my son? And he said, behold, the Lord thy God brought it to me. So Isaac here is getting suspicious. He's wondering what's going on. But you know what? I'm not so sure Jacob wasn't telling the truth here. I think, in a sense, the Lord God did bring him this meat through his mother, because I think God was probably working through Rebekah to make sure Esau did not get this blessing. Okay? So, verse 21, and Isaac said unto Jacob, come near, I pray thee, that I may feel thee, my son, whether thou be my very son Esau or not. And Jacob went near unto Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So his dad's confused here. He said, something's not adding up. And he discerned him not, because his hands were hairy, and his brother Esau's hands, as his brother's Esau's hands. So he blessed him. Okay, it worked. Even though his dad was a little confused, he probably thought, man, I don't know. Something doesn't seem right, but maybe I'm just getting old and crazy here. This got to be Esau. I feel the hair. It must be right. So Isaac blesses Jacob anyways, even though it just didn't seem right, okay? Now, it's interesting. Had Isaac's eyesight been good, he would have never been able to pull off this. Jacob would have never been able to pull this off. Now, I have no doubt that God probably had God probably had something to do with Isaac's vision being dim so that this could come to pass. God has ways of making things happen in ways that we sometimes can't comprehend. Verse 25, and he said, bring it near me, and I will eat of my son's venison, that my soul may bless thee. And he brought it near to him, and he did eat. And he brought him wine, and he drank. Okay? Notice you see wine here. This isn't the only time wine is consumed by God's people. Of course, in moderation. The legalists will come out and say, you got to have a prohibition. You can't have one drop of alcohol if you're a Christian. It's simply not true. Verse 26, and his father Isaac said unto him, come near now and kiss me, my son. And he came near and kissed him. And he smelled the smell of his raiment and blessed him and said, see, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field which the Lord hath blessed. Therefore, verse 28, therefore God give thee the dew of heaven and the fatness of earth and plenty of corn and wine. Okay? Now, this is interesting. These blessings that the patriarchs were able to pass on their children were pretty significant things. You think about it, this whole ordeal was so important that Jacob, and I shouldn't say Jacob and Rebekah, I should say it was more of Rebekah's doing. Rebekah had to come up with a plan to secure that blessing for Jacob. Today we'd think, what's the big deal? The guy's going to lay his hands on him and say, blessed is you. Why can't he just go do that to his other son as well? There was something binding here. Not only were these birthrights legally binding too, they also were prophetic. They were able to actually pronounce some prophetic things that would happen. Something to think about. Verse 29, let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Now check this out. Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. Now, we've done studies on this in the past, earlier on in the book of Genesis. I believe this birthright passed all the way down to our forefathers who came here to America on the Mayflower 400 years ago, but next year, in 1620. And that birthright now belongs, that national birthright, that national blessing of becoming a great nation, a superpower of superpowers, where other nations actually bow down to us because we are that powerful, belongs to America. I believe America holds this very birthright that we're reading about back here, thousands of years ago. It's amazing. Because it can only fit one nation. No other nation's been one nation under God that ever in history that has controlled the gates of its enemies, that has had such a dominant military force that no other nation could defeat. Okay? I will say this. A lot of people try to take this verse and say, blessed is he that blesses thee, and cursed be he that curses thee, as applying to the modern day Zionist movement. You know, they think that the modern day nation of Israel, if you say something bad against that nation, that you're going to be cursed. But that nation does, as a whole, at this time anyways, maybe they'll change later, I don't know, but that nation as a whole does not accept Jesus Christ. They are not the birthright or the holders of the blessings. They are not a great nation that has all this land, this plenty of corn and wine. There's only one country that has that right now, and it's America. In fact, you look at all this farmland in America, we actually feed a majority of the world. You think about that. A lot of people don't realize that. We actually export our food out to feed most of the world. A lot of countries would not survive without our exports of our agriculture products. It's amazing. And is it for our benefit? Is it only for our benefit that we be the holders of this blessings? No, it's for the benefit of the world. Okay, God's people are supposed to be a one nation under God that are a blessing unto the world. All right. Verse 30, and it came to pass as soon as Isaac had made an end of blessing Jacob, and Jacob was yet scarce gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. Uh-oh. Not a good thing here. Now notice who can say that the Bible's boring? I mean, look at this. Look at the dramatic instance here. Jacob just got out of there, and now Esau comes back. I mean, this is pretty exciting stuff. He almost got caught. This is in today's. I guess you'd classify this story as like as a drama or a thriller or something like that in the movie section. But verse 31. And he also made savory meat and brought it unto his father, and said unto his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's venison, that thy soul may bless me. Verse 32, and Isaac his father said unto him, who art thou? And he said, I am thy son, thy firstborn, Esau. Verse 33, and Isaac trembled very exceedingly, and said, who? Where is he that hath taken venison and brought it to me? And I have eaten of all before thou camest, and have blessed him. Yea, and he shall be blessed. Now, his father now realized that he had been tricked. And he said, well, who was just in here? Who just came and got the blessing? Okay. Notice, he's going to find out here that it was Jacob. Esau's going to figure it out. But notice the binding nature of this oath of passing on this blessing. This was something that even Isaac himself, once he pronounces, cannot be reversed. He can't say, oh, well, Jacob, you did it, you deceived me to have it. Now I'm going to take that back and give it to Esau, who I intended to give it to in the first place. So it's an interesting nature about this kind of a blessing, at least back here from the father. It could not be changed. Once the word was spoken, it was spoken. We don't think about, we think about this as being Old Testament times, where fathers pass on blessings to their children at their deathbed, and that this stuff doesn't happen anymore in any situation. But I really do believe there are some instances where this still happens, where fathers can still pass blessings and birthrights onto their children. I'll just share a little quick history about something here. I did some research. I was doing some genealogical research soon after I had really started getting into the Bible. I had this immense hunger. I don't know. I know where it came from. It came from God. But it was after I turned 18, all of a sudden I was so hungry for the Word of God, and I needed to find out answers. I needed to absorb it and study it. And during that period of time, I was doing some ancestry research, and I came across one of my ancestors. His name was Spencer Madison, and I found out he was a pastor, a minister. He was actually a teacher at some universities and a scholar in the biblical languages and stuff. Anyways, this is what this guy lived for. But I found one of his writings, and in his writings he actually made a prayer that his descendants would see the light of the truth of God's word. And I'm just paraphrasing. It was so long ago. Actually, since then, I lost the document. Actually, my brother had it, and he got into a bad divorce, and I never got the paperwork back, and I've been trying to find it ever since so I could show these kids. But then what was interesting about that is my mom is not a Christian woman. She's not a Bible believer. She felt the need to have my middle name be Spencer. And just because she said just because she liked the way it sounded or something. But after reading, I never liked the name Spencer. As a kid growing up, I thought, I don't like that middle name. But then after reading his prayer and thinking, here I am doing what he prayed that his descendants would do, and I thought, how did my mom, who's not a believer, want that name to be on me? And I smiled. I thought only God could do that. Pass that on. It was almost like God was making his, answering his prayer by ratifying it, if you would, or making it known by that middle name. His first name being passed on to be my middle name. And now since that, we passed that middle name on to our oldest son, Jacob. Interesting. But the point is, I do think, even though we don't do this today, I do think that there probably is a power in blessing your children, as fathers blessing their children. I know one thing: when a father actually participates in studying the Bible, and I guess studies and go to church, most of the children stay Christians their entire life. But when the mother drags the father to church, and the father just sits there and he's bored, and he's like, "Oh, when is this going to be over?" Unfortunately, there's a reason for that as well. But if it's the mother trying to lead, the greater percentages of those children end up falling away from the faith. But there's something about a father, if he leads his household in a godly way, it has a lot more lasting impact upon the children. Mothers is that downing mothers? No, but it goes to show that God has an ordained purpose for both mothers and fathers. And fathers, their purpose is to pass on the birthright and the blessing to generation, just like our forefathers did, who built this great nation, America. And yet now we're at a point in history where at least half of our nation cares nothing about our heritage and our birthrights. And it's sad. They're like Esau. We talked about that last week. Anyways, let's get on to this and wrap this up. Where are we at here? Verse 34. And when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with a great and exceeding bitter cry, and said unto his father, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." And he said, "Thy brother came with subtlety, and hath taken away thy blessing." So Esau now, he's panicking, he's crying. But does Esau want the blessing for his posterity? Does he want to pass on a godly heritage to his children? No, what Esau sees is the corn and the wine and the produce and the greatness. He doesn't see the spiritual side of it, that he was supposed to be under God. He was supposed to put his trust in God. So how does that work today? Well, we have people today in America that want all the blessings. They want all the abundance of everything, but they don't want to trust in God. They don't want to be under God. They want to just have the goodies, but not do anything to really secure that right to those things. Verse 35, and he said, "Thy brother came..." Okay, I read that. Verse 36, and he said, Esau says, "Is not he rightly named Jacob?" Because Jacob means heel grabber or the wrestler. Okay, so Jacob wrestled this. Not only did he wrestle his birthright away, now he wrestled the blessings away as well. Well, I guess he says it here. I should have just read. "For he hath supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he hath taken away my blessing. And he said, Hast thou reserved a blessing for me?" Okay, but remember, this birthright and the blessing we're talking, actually this is the blessing. They're both kind of tied together. But this blessing did not belong to Esau. It never did. God said from when those two twins were in Rebekah's womb, God already proclaimed that the blessing and the birthright belonged to Jacob. So in a sense, this chapter could be titled, Esau and Isaac are trying to steal the birthright and the blessing away from Jacob. You see how it's actually totally reversed from what we're taught in Sunday school. Oh, don't be like Jacob. He was a little deceptive and mean. Okay, so it was actually the other way around. Esau was trying to steal that was not his. And Isaac was going along with it because he was blinded by the meals that Esau was providing him. All right, verse 37. And Isaac answered and said unto Esau, Behold, I have made him thy lord, and all his brethren have I given to him for servants. And with corn and wine have I sustained him. And what shall I do unto thee, my son? In other words, Isaac says, I can't reverse what was done. I pretty much gave Jacob all the blessing. And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. He was crying like a big baby here. Big hunter boy out there. Verse 39, And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven from above. That actually sounds like a pretty decent deal here so far. But verse 40, And by thy sword shalt thou live, and thou shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. It's interesting. So he said at some future time, the Edomites, the children of Esau, would be free. And many people see within that the birth and growth of the Soviet Union or the nation of Russia today. That they did become a superpower almost equal to that of America. All right. Verse 41, And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, The days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob. So you see, Esau's hatred here for his brother Jacob is very similar to the hatred that Cain had for Abel. It was a hatred that developed from jealousy. Because remember, this wasn't Esau's in the first place. Isaac only facilitated in helping Esau believe that lie. And so that's what was in Esau's heart, hatred and jealousy rather than obedience to God. Verse 42, And these words of Esau, her elder son, were told to Rebekah. And she went, and she sent and called Jacob her younger son, and said unto him, Behold, thy brother Esau, as touching thee, doth comfort himself, purposing to kill thee. In other words, Esau was comforting himself in his own heart, saying, I'm going to get him, I'm going to kill him, I'm going to get this birthright back. Hey, it's kind of like what the leftists do to us in a spiritual way. To America as they try to steal back the birthright that does not belong to them. Verse 43, Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, and arise, flee thou to Laban my brother, to Haran, and tarry with him a few days until thy brother's fury turn away, until thy brother's anger turn away from thee, and he forget that which thou hast done to him. Then I will send and fetch thee from thence. Why should I be deprived also of you both in one day? Okay, so she's not only you can see here, Rebekah was a wise woman. She came up with a plan to get what rightfully belonged to Jacob. Now she comes up with a plan to make sure Jacob stays safe. Okay, she was very smart. She knew that time was a great healer, and that sometimes you can be very mad in the heat of the moment and do things that you wouldn't normally do. So she's providing a break in the action here to let a little steam out of the kettle, if you would. Verse 46, And Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life. Now check this out. Last verse. I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob take a wife of the daughters of Heth, such as these which are the daughters of the land, what good shall my life do to me? What is that all about? Well, the daughters of Heth were Canaanites. They were pagan women. Esau already married two of them. And you know that it was God's command that they would not, if they married the pagans, then their children would become pagans, right? That's why it's important for us to marry Christians, so that we don't grieve our family and risk losing the blessings that were passed down by our Christian parents and so on. But think about this for a minute. So these Canaanites were of a different tribe of people, a different race of people. By today's standards, people would consider Rebekah to be a xenophobe and a racist. How dare she look down upon those people like that? I mean, they come to God a different way. I mean, they believe in Buddha or Allah or Krishna or Vishnu or whatever other God. I mean, that's very judgmental of Rebekah to say that her life would be, she's weary of her life because of these because of these Canaanite women. And we're programmed to believe that today, that is a very bad thing. No, it was done to protect and preserve the culture. That's something we don't hear too often today. People are unwilling to protect and preserve our culture for fear of being called a racist or a xenophobe or whatnot. But it's always been that way. It was always important in the Bible. Now, since Christ came, people from all different races, I shouldn't say creeds, but races, tribes, languages, they all joined together in Christ as part of the church. But it doesn't mean that they all have to be part of the same nation. In the eternity, let's talk about the church as believers in Christ, we're all one. But in the eternity, Israel's still a nation. You can find it in the book of Revelation as well as in Ezekiel. Israel's still a nation. And all the other believing nations that are now believers in Christ, they are still separate nations living among their people. They come and visit, and there's fellowship, but there's not commingling. There's not commingling of the people. It's God loves the nations, I believe, and He's ordained them. He set the boundaries, and I don't think we should change that. I think we should have the attitude like Rebekah, to love our heritage, our birthright, and our culture, and not be ashamed of it. Today we're taught that it's really mean to be like that. I can imagine the Canaanites back then. Not Rebekah. I can imagine some of the Canaanite dads or daughters saying they maybe they thought Jacob was a handsome guy and wanted to marry him. Say, what's wrong with that Rebekah lady? Why won't she let us marry him? Who does she think she is? She better than us? I mean, they would have been saying the same things back then, but did Rebekah care? Absolutely not. Who do we fear man? What men will say to us? What men will label us and call us? No, we should fear what God thinks of us. All right? So in conclusion, biblical birthrights and blessings are something very important and something often forgotten today. And they were even binding and prophetic statements given by the Father for the sons. I don't know how it all works. I didn't go into that in detail. But just by observing it, I mean, from what I can take out of this, is it obviously was very important. Just in recapping, had Rebekah just sat back and allowed Isaac to bless Esau, everything would have been lost. Like Rebekah said, my life would be meaningless if the birthright is passed on to somebody the birthright and the blessing is passed on to someone who doesn't care for it, somebody who worships a different God, or somebody who's carnal rather than spiritually minded. It would just go to waste. And that's it. Anybody got any questions or comments?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out
a lot of verses in that chapter.
Yeah, why Isaac didn't know whether he had vision or not. Why he wanted to give Esau the blessings? I mean, because like Abraham had Isaac and Ishmael, right?
Yep.
And God made it pretty clear that Ishmael he hated. Isn't that the one that he said he hated?
He didn't use that strong language for Esau or for Ishmael. He just said that I've chosen Isaac.
Okay. So yeah, he made it obvious that Isaac is the one that should be carrying the birthright and all that. But then he didn't do that when Jacob and Esau were born. He didn't make it clear that Jacob was the...
Oh, well, he did, but to Rebekah.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if he was testing Isaac, but that's a good point. I never thought about that. With Abraham, he actually came directly to Abraham and told him, "No, it's gonna be Isaac." But yeah, he did come. I mean, he did come, but this time he came to Rebekah.
Well, that's even more interesting to me then, because then it seemed like he was all along testing Rebekah if she would have the fortitude to stand up and do what was right.
Right. And Rebekah, I mean, there's a lot more into this than meets the eye. We learned before that Rebekah is actually a type or a symbol of the church, and because she. When she met and married Isaac, there was all these parallels between her and the church of the New Testament. I think seeing her display this. I mean, the church should be like Rebekah. In other words, we should care for our heritage and do what it takes when other people are trying to, or when our brothers are risking to allow our heritage to go down the toilet, to stand up and figure out ways to defend it. I don't know exactly what that looks like, other than being willing to put your neck out on the line, right, like she did. I mean, that's back in those days in that culture. I mean, that was a pretty risky thing for her to do. I mean, she was disobeying her husband, but she was obeying the will of God. No.
Just like you said a couple weeks ago, it's fun going through it chapter by chapter because, again, another topic that's not popular that you probably would not really want to dive into, but you're like, oh, better do it.
Right.
In the book.
Well, especially with Rebekah's comment at the end. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, the traditional thing for a lot of churches is they just they come up with a sermon, they kind of skim a couple pick the goodies, and they deliver that. And it's so easy to not talk about the things that are controversial that way. And then that way God's word never actually gets across in its totality. And by going line by line, you're letting God do the talking. Right. We do the listening and the obeying, even if it's uncomfortable. It's not an easy thing to do. But, yeah.
Yeah, there was that other, I don't remember the names, but there was that other story where a woman let some Christian men in that they were searching for, and she hid them in her house. Right.
Oh yeah.
They came and knocked on the door, and she's like, "No, I haven't seen them."
Right. Yeah. Rahab the harlot.
Yeah, that's it.
She lied. She lied to protect the spies of Israel, and she's actually listed in the Heroes of Faith chapter, Hebrews 11, for doing that specific act.
Yeah, lying to the people that were
lying to the enemy. Yeah. So.
But it's only proper to lie when it's for godly.
Christian Overcomers is brought to you by the tithes and offerings of our listeners. If you would like to support our ministry, please go to ChristianOvercomers.com. God bless you, and thank you for your support.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible sword. His truth is marching on.